Yes, as an elected official, it would be very nice to know which of the messages I get are actually verifiable by my constituents and which ones are not. The struggle is real. I think implementation seems to be our biggest issue. When we look at the possibilities and the solutions that blockchain can solve in government, they are many. But really getting down to the nitty-gritty, I'm an engineer, and so implementation is really the hardest part. When it comes to elections, it's the perfect example on where blockchain would be a very useful technology. Your vote should be immutable. No one should be able to change it. It should be transparent in that people need to have confidence when they count those votes. But it simultaneously needs to be anonymous so that you have the right to a secret ballot. And then there's another key here, a key that, particularly here in the United States, we seem to forget. And that is for the will of the people to be trusted, we also have to have those elections be accessible. Right now, there is a movement to try to create immutable and transparent elections, and they always forget that accessibility piece. There's a big movement to try to make a hand marked, hand counted paper ballot the only method of voting. But when you do that, all you need is a pen to hack that election. A pen with some stray marks can make a ballot uncountable. As a former election official, I was a county clerk during the 2020 presidential election. Stray marks on a ballot make it so that a tabulator cannot count that ballot. At that point, it defaults to a human eye. And in that point, we're looking for if we can decipher voter intent. A pen is probably the least technical solution, but it really, truly can hack a ballot. So, blockchain can solve this problem. It can create an immutable ballot. It can create a transparent ballot in that after the election, anybody could look at the blockchain and count how these ballots were cast. Utilizing cryptography, it can also create an anonymous ballot. And then we come down to how I have actually implemented blockchain in elections. It creates an accessible ballot. I think we're probably at least a decade away from broad adoption of blockchain technology in elections. However, we've already deployed it for our overseas and military citizens and for people with disabilities. For these communities, accessing a ballot is incredibly difficult right now. And oftentimes, in order to cast their vote, they have to waive their right to a secret ballot. Blockchain technology can absolutely be used, and it is being deployed today for overseas and military members in many states and for people with disabilities in a handful of states. And it gives them the ability to accessibly and anonymously cast their ballot in a way that they can verify that their ballot was counted correctly. Moving forward, this is the direction that we really need to go. The problem with adoption in this case is that you don't actually have to hack an election in order to sow doubt. All you have to do is convince people that you did. So until the general public understands that blockchain truly is immutable, truly is transparent, and truly has the ability to instill confidence in them, it doesn't matter what we implement. Part of the problem that we have here is that we as practitioners and technologists, and I am guilty of this as well, we always come forward and we try to explain the technology. I think you've heard this several times. You try to explain the technology. So I want to give you two stories really quickly that demonstrate maybe a different approach to trying to explain the technology to the public. The first is when I was the county clerk and I was very first implementing blockchain elections, we needed a use case. I got a call from a reporter and she said, "Do you have any people with disabilities that we can go to that would be willing to go on camera and cast their vote utilizing your blockchain system. So I just put out an announcement on Facebook. I said, hey, is there anybody that has a disability that's willing to have me come to their house on election day with a news crew and we can utilize an iPad to cast your vote? And my mom texted me and she said, this is a perfect case for Maxine. So I replied back to her and I said, like, Maxine that lived a block and a half from you that was like 100 when I was a kid, Maxine, she's still alive? And my mom said, yes, she's 106 years old, homebound in a wheelchair. And I wonder if Maxine would be interested. Well, the key here is that this was in 2020. And 2020 was a big year in the world of women voting. 2020 marked 100 years since women in the United States had the right to vote. So I called Maxine and I talked to her and her daughter, ironically in her 80s, who was her caretaker, and asked if they would be willing to have me come into their home. I grew up with Maxine's granddaughter, so she knew me well, and she said, absolutely. And I have to tell you, sitting there with Maxine at 106 years old, a woman who was born before women had the right to vote, and helping her to cast a vote, to exercise her constitutional right. And after she did, the news reporter said to me, what do you say to people that are not quite sure about this technology? What do you say to someone who doesn't like what you just did? And I said, Maxine was born before women had the right to vote, and I will be damned if I'm going to let somebody else's unfounded fears prevent her from casting her vote. And that's really the attitude that we have to have when we come together and say, if somebody's fear is unfounded, we need to just push through it. And we need to say, your ability to not understand the technology should not prevent our ability to implement it. The second story that I want to tell you really quickly involves how I got one of our first pieces of blockchain legislation passed in the state of Utah. I was trying to get a bill passed that allows people to pay the government in crypto. I wanted someone to be able to pay their taxes or whatever the case may be in crypto. And there are unbanked peoples and there are unbanked industries. And at the time, we had a cannabis farm that provided medical cannabis. And that industry is largely unbanked. And I was the county auditor at the time. And so we had a cannabis farm who was literally walking into our government building with duffel bags of cash to pay their taxes. As a government auditor, I really don't like people walking into my building with duffel bags full of cash and then having my employees have to count it 3 and 4 times. Kind of going back to this hand counted, hand marked paper ballots. When you have 4 people counting the same thing, you get 4 different numbers. And that's really frustrating for an auditor or an election official. So I'm sitting before a House committee. And at the time, energy and technology ran together. And so a lot of the energy bills are representatives. We had a representative, his name is Representative Scott Chu. And Scott Chu is a rancher and a cowboy. He has a handlebar mustache, wears a cowboy hat and boots every single day. And Scott Chu says to me, Commissioner, I'd love to vote for your bill, but I just don't understand how this works. How could I even use Bitcoin? I don't understand Bitcoin. And I looked at Scott and I said, Scott, you're a rancher, you've got lambs. Do you have any bummer lambs right now? And he said, yeah, I've got some bummer lambs. I said, great, I have 2 4-H boys who need bummer lambs for this year's livestock option. Tell you what, why don't I come up to your ranch with my boys? I pay them their allowance in Bitcoin. We can download Coinbase on your phone right there in the middle of the field. You can tell us how much you want for that bummer lamb. I will put that number into my child's phone, Coinbase app on his phone. He can scan the QR code on your phone with his phone. And then as soon as we put your bank number into that Coinbase app, that money will show up in your bank account. And he said, but how does it happen? And I said, Scott, I don't really know. I used to work for Caterpillar and I worked for Caterpillar. I lived in Canada and Caterpillar paid me in US dollars. And then I had to pay all my bills in Canadian dollars. And I got really sick of exchanging the money. And then I realized that my American Express didn't charge me international service fees. So I just started paying all my bills with my Amex, and then I let them figure it out. And when they sent me the bill, I paid it out of my US bank account. I don't know how it happened. You don't need to know how it happened. All you need to know is that I don't want duffel bags of cash showing up. And if you pass this bill, these people can pay their taxes without a duffel bag of cash. Scott Chu said, good enough for me. Every single year we go to the legislature, one question comes up. How many Bitcoin does a bummer lamb cost today? Thank you.